Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight our feature will be Shimon Peres, who died recently at the age of 93. Shimon Peres was one of the great statesmen of Israel. He was actually the last link to the founding pioneers of Israel. His career in politics of 70 years spans the entire history of the nation of Israel, and he was also a co-winner of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1994, along with Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, so I guess you could put him into our Nobel Prize winner category also. He grew up in Poland before World War II, and his family emigrated to what was then Palestine. Most of his relatives, including his grandparents, remained in Poland and were killed in the Holocaust. He became a protege of David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, and his career is marked by contradictions. Early in his life, he was a hawk, and he helped Israel acquire the weapons that helped them win their independence in 1948, and he later helped them acquire nuclear weapons. But later in life, he became a dove and was influential in the peace process. He always felt that the key to peace with the surrounding Arab countries would come through education and science. He acknowledged that while only a small percentage of the Arabs that surrounded Israel were terrorists, many more who were educated would not be able to find creative outlets without factories and businesses in Arab countries, and that was one of his main goals. He worked at one time or another with every major country in the world, including those in the East Bloc, Russia, and especially China, and those in the Western Bloc, the United States and Europe. Here is the BBC4 Last Word with Matthew Bannister on the life of Shimon Peres.
Shimon Peres was the grand old man of Israeli politics. His career spanned the entire history of the country. He was Defense Secretary, Foreign Secretary, and twice Prime Minister, although he had little success at winning elections. In 2007, Mr. Peres became President of Israel, a ceremonial position which he held until his retirement in 2014. His funeral was attended by many world leaders, including the Prince of Wales, the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas, and President Barack Obama. Shimon Peres was born in Poland, the son of a timber merchant and a librarian. When he was 10, the family emigrated to Palestine, which was then under British control. After his education, Shimon Peres worked on a kibbutz and rose through the ranks of the Labour Party, reaching the very top. The BBC's Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen.
He was the right-hand man of the first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, the ruthless visionary who was the founding Prime Minister of Israel.
I was privileged to work closely with a man who was and remains, to my mind, the greatest Jew of our time.
Yair Zivan was the foreign press spokesman for President Shimon Peres.
President Peres came to Israel before there was a country here, before there was a state here. He was one of the founders of the country. And his primary involvement in the early years before the founding of the state and in the early days of the state was to create a defense force that could protect the Jewish people. And that was part of his vision for the state of Israel, be a country where Jewish people could be safe and could be protected.
From 1948, one of his most important jobs was procuring weapons for the Israeli army.
He played an important role during the Suez Crisis in getting Israel nuclear capability. How did he manage to do that?
The whole Suez Crisis was essentially an agreement between the British, the French and the Israelis to invade Egypt, which ended in a fiasco. But based on those good relations that he had developed, very close relations, he negotiated the transfer of the technology to build a nuclear reactor from France to Israel, and that was what allowed the Israelis, with some foreign help, to build their own arsenal of nuclear weapons. And actually it's interesting that even though they don't acknowledge that, the Israeli Atomic Energy Authority actually put out its own tribute saying that Shimon Peres was a vital part of what it called the way that Israel's security is enhanced by nuclear technology, or something like that, almost saying thanks for the nukes, but not quite.
So people have seen him as a dove, as a peacemaker, but in his earlier days he was very hawkish.
He was extremely hawkish. Ben-Gurion was very hawkish, and he was the big formative influence on Peres.
I mean, Peres goes back into history.
The former British Foreign Secretary, Lord Owen.
He had a huge influence on Israel throughout his life, and he was always searching for a solution The problem was he didn't really have a big enough constituency, even within the Israeli Labour Party, to carry the weight with the populace that he carried with politicians worldwide.
Ironically for him, one of the reasons why he was never really trusted by the Israeli electorate was the fact that he'd never worn a uniform, that he'd never led men in combat. So in 1948, he was going around in a suit in America, in Paris, in different places, making sure that they had weapons, which actually militarily was, a far more important thing to do than lead a small group of men to try and take a hill somewhere near Jerusalem. And the fact that he hadn't worn a uniform, that he hadn't led men on a sweaty, bloody field, really counted against him.
Nobel Peace Prize laureate of 1994, Shimon Peres, to come to the rostrum to receive the gold medal and the diploma.
As Israel's foreign minister, Shimon Peres played a crucial role in negotiating the Oslo Accord with the Palestinians, a mission which earned him a share of the Nobel Peace Prize.
Peres was somebody who never lost his conviction that Israel had to be the strongest regional power in the Middle East. But as time went by, I think he changed his view of the other side, of the Arab side, of the Palestinian side. He believed that it was possible to make a deal with them, and he had this vision of a new Middle East, as he called it, linked by economic ties, and that would ensure peace. And the Oslo process was something started by Norwegian diplomats, hence Oslo, but something that was a secret track of negotiations and which culminated in 1993 with the historic handshake on the White House lawn, President Clinton beaming.
Now the efforts of all who have labored before us bring us to this moment, a moment when we dare to pledge what for so long seemed difficult even to imagine.
Peres there, beaming.
What we are doing today is more than signing an agreement. It is a revolution.
Arafat beaming. Rabin, the Prime Minister, a bit grumpy, but really after that it started to go wrong. But for a couple of years, certainly until the assassination of Rabin by a Jewish extremist in 1995, and even a little way after that, there was a feeling that the Israeli-Palestinian relationship was changing fundamentally forever, and also that better times were coming, and there was real hope around.
People often ask if Shimon Peres was disappointed because he didn't get to see a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. He didn't get to see the Middle East that was at peace with itself and with each other. But that's to misunderstand Shimon Peres and the way that he viewed the world. He was an eternal optimist. He always believed that the world could be better, but it wasn't a naive optimism. It was an optimism that was combined with a sense of realism. And he believed, and if there's one thing that he taught me and one lesson that I was left with, was that you have to be optimistic, and then you have to get up early in the morning and work hard to make the vision that you have come true. My first conversation with him, he asked some general questions about who I was and where I came from, and then he asked me if I write. And when I told him that that of course I write speeches and press releases, he shook his head and smiled and said, no, do you really write? Because what really interested him was whether I wrote poetry and songs. Shimon Peres, that people don't know so well, was a man who loved literature and poetry as much as he loved science and technology.
I think Israelis looked back and saw a man who'd given his whole life to the creation of the state, had a big part in its achievements.
Israel's role in the Middle East should be to contribute to a great, sustained regional revival. A Middle East in which every believer will be free to pray in his own language, Arabic, Hebrew, Latin, or whatever language he chooses, and in which the prayers will reach their destination without censorship, without interference, without offending anyone.
BBC Now is completely fair to Israeli leaders, but I think they were pretty reasonable there. We're going to turn now to Agnes Nixon, who recently died at the age of 93. And Agnes Nixon was the creator of some of the most influential daytime soap operas of the 1960s. Nice Irish Catholic girl, born in Chicago, went to Northwestern University, by the way. She studied acting there. She studied with Charlton Heston and Patricia Neal, but she realized she wasn't as good as them, so she went into writing. She wrote for the legendary soap opera creator Irma Phillips on As the World Turns and Guiding Light. And at a time when most subjects in soap operas were light fare, she wrote more serious stuff. Notably, on Guiding Light in 1962, she wrote about a woman who had a pap smear and then uterine cancer based on one of her friends, That was the first time anything like that had ever been portrayed on daytime television. Then she went on to create two of television's most influential soap operas, One Life to Live and All My Children, and she infused those with all sorts of controversial topics: abortion, Vietnam, racism, homosexuality. Here, Agnes Nixon talks about the creation of All My Children for Procter & Gamble.
Well, I wrote All My Children first. P&G wanted to do a show. This must have been in the early 60s, like mid-60s, I guess. So I created this show and All My Children, and P&G liked it very much, and so did CBS, and CBS, then headed by Fred Silverman, daytime. So they were going to put it on at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, at which time there was a show sponsored by Lever Brothers entitled Truth or Consequences. And it had about 10 months to run on its contract, but Fred Silverman said, doesn't matter, we'll buy them out. We're going to put it on. Lo and behold, because that would have been P&G and CBS doing this, and Lever Brothers threatened to sue both companies for collusion, and so they had to drop the plans. And of course I thought, as all I'm sure creative people feel, that it probably was because it wasn't any good. So I just put it in a desk drawer. That's when I started writing Another World. I did not start writing Another World until after I had written All My Children. And then that became very successful, and ABC asked me to do a show for them, and I created One Life to Live. And then a year later, it was pretty successful, and ABC asked if I could write another show for them. And I said to my husband, I can't think up another one so soon. And he said, well, what about All My Children? And I said, oh, do you really think that's good? And he said, I think it's terrific. So I just took it out of the desk drawer and handed it to them. They thought, wow, was she a fast worker? Of course, everyone knew the story soon after, but so that's how it happened.
Well, after having a statesman and a writer, tonight we're going to close with food. And we're going to start with the Carnegie Deli, which is essentially dying after 79 years. One of the most well-known delis in the world on 55th Street and 7th Avenue, New York. Used to go there all the time, took a lot of people there. It's the second of the great 7th Avenue delis to close. We did the podcast on the Stage Deli a couple years ago. It was well known for its huge corned beef sandwiches, huge pastrami sandwiches, and its cheesecake, and also the rude waiters. Last time I was there, one of the kids I was with asked what came with a sandwich, and the waiter said bread and meat. And the walls were lined with autographed photos of celebrities. One time with my wife, I saw Jackie Mason in there. Hey, he was eating a corned beef sandwich. Here's a report on the Carnegie Deli.
If you want iconic, I mean like true New York royalty, then you come here, the Carnegie Deli.
Heaven, I'm in heaven.
Here it is, the Carnegie Deli, the Manhattan landmark resting on 55th and 7th that has graced New York since 1937. And this deli has been the subject in many places in pop culture. It was in the Woody Allen film Broadway Danny Rose, and even had its place in Adam Sandler's Hanukkah song.
Guess who eats together at the Carnegie Deli? Bowser from Sha-Na-Na and Arthur Fonzarelli.
But now New York will lose one of its culinary landmarks, as the Carnegie Deli is going to close for good at the end of 2016. Apparently owner Marion Harper,
I'm just going to keep eating pastrami because that makes you live longer,
announced to her staff that she is calling it quits. But the good news is they'll still have their places in Vegas and Pennsylvania, just not New York, where they're supposed to be. So goodbye Carnegie Deli, one more New York institution that will probably be replaced by a Starbucks or a Panda Express. But we raise a pastrami sandwich to you, and the memory you leave of a New York that once was.
Well, we're going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps, and we're going to close with a little earworm for you, written by Richard Trentlage, who died recently at the age of 87. Richard Trentlage was an ad man. He wrote advertising jingles. Among others, he wrote Buckle Up for Safety. But without question, his most famous was a jingle he wrote for a contest held by J. Walter Thompson. Here's a 1965 commercial featuring it.
Class attention. Forward march. Oh, I'd love to be an Oscar Meyer winner. That is what I